everybody, David Lindstedt here. I'm very honored to have with me today Mr. Ken Jenkins, expert and author, talking about his new book called Resilience, Stories of Courage and Survival in Aviation Disasters. And Ken, I'll start by saying this wasn't the book sort of I expected from the title and from the cover. I was thinking it was going to be more like the Who Survives Aviation Disasters and Why, stories of which person used which flotation device, but it's not really that kind of a book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
The book is about my experiences working with 8 different fatal aviation accidents and working with the family members of those that lost somebody on board an aviation disaster, and what they experienced, what we as responders experienced, and more importantly, I think what I saw in terms of resilience of how these folks were gracious enough to let us in their homes, to work with them, and how they overcame adversity during, I think, one of the most difficult times and challenges of their life. I mentioned in the book, and one thing that I'd like to share with folks is I was in like the 2nd or 3rd training class at American Airlines for our special assistance team training. And our facilitator said, you know, we'll never have to use this training, but in case we do, we'll be ready. And I thought, never say never, because as you mentioned, we had 3 fatal crashes in 14 months. American was one of the pioneers of the family assistance movement, if you will, that came about in the early 1990s.
Now, talk a little bit about how this movement did come about in the 1990s. How did this start? And you talk about the 1996 The Act. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay. Well, in the early 90s, American had an accident, well, a fatal accident back in 1979, and then an accident in Puerto Rico a few years later. And they decided that it was important that employees that were going to respond certainly be trained. There were rules and regulations about how they would respond, but there was no formal training program. So they started this in 1993. But during that time period of when this program was being developed, there were a number of high-profile accidents like TWA 800, ValueJet 592, US Air Accident 427, American Eagle Flight 4184, and the families of those events lobbied Congress because of a number of shortcomings that were performed on behalf of the airlines, and the families just didn't think it was appropriate. And they lobbied Congress for change. And in 1996, the Aviation Disaster Family Assistance Act was born as a result of the advocacy of these family members.
So you created a team that would partner very closely with the families that had been affected by these tragic airline disasters.
Well, I would love to say that I created it. I was a part of it. I was a volunteer initially and worked with families in the first 2 accidents in 1994 and a command center leader in 1995 in the Cali-Columbia accident at our telephone inquiry center. There were other folks that kind of paved the way, but through my experience, I became the manager of the program for 8 years.
So, and we're talking about a large number of people. I mean, this isn't a dozen people that sort of fly out and one person takes 5 people. We're talking hundreds.
Hundreds of people. In our first accident, where the team was deployed, which was in 1994, and I don't mention this number in the book, there were 68 souls on board that died, and we launched approximately 486 team members to respond to those 68. And it doesn't mean that those 486 were all working with families. There's a lot of infrastructure that's created, and there are multiple command centers that are set up that have manpower, of course, at each of those command centers, and so those numbers are included. But those 486 were volunteers from the company, so that number didn't include departments like a corporate communications department or a risk management department or the accident investigation team from American that went. Those weren't considered the volunteers. That's their job to do, where the 486 were people that had everyday jobs in the company that went through a 2-day training program volunteer to go out and help when a disaster strikes.
And that's what makes this book, this story, all the more meaningful. Is we're talking about people who have regular jobs and drop everything and leave their families for weeks on end to come out and help with the people that have been affected by these disasters.